In this video, we're learning about egalitarianism, and who better to learn about it from than people who hate it? I'm going to be looking at arguments in 3 essays from influential libertarian capitalists against the idea of egalitarianism, and I'll be contrasting them with what egalitarianism actually is. When I refer to other videos I've made, the links are in the description. Let's start with Murray Rothbard. You may never have heard of Murray, but he was pretty influential on the thinking of right libertarians and conservatives more generally. I'm going to read an essay of his from 1974. You might be familiar with some of what he says because we still hear these arguments today. I would call Murray Rothbard the father of so-called anarcho-capitalism, and as a former ANCAP myself, I'm familiar with his writing. In the introduction, Murray says he's going to analyze the merits and demerits of leftist thought. I figured if anyone could mount a real argument against equality for all, this guy could. I was disappointed. I thought Murray was going to take leftist arguments seriously, but instead his flagship essay makes the Harrison Bergeron argument. Have you read Harrison Bergeron? Because Murray inadvertently summarizes the plot. Equality of all men, the egalitarian ideal, can only be achieved if all men are precisely uniform, precisely identical with respect to all of their attributes. The egalitarian world would necessarily be a world of horror fiction, a world of faceless and identical creatures devoid of all individuality, variety, or special creativity. What? No. No egalitarian says equality means sameness. And no egalitarianism would lead to that. Instead of looking at any of the Marxist or anarchist analysis of how systems work, which was abundant even in 1974, the only place Murray looks for what egalitarianism means is science fiction. It feels like a deliberate omission to keep his followers ignorant. You might be aware he also admitted to changing the meaning of libertarian for rhetorical purposes in his book Betrayal of the American Right. I remember during my time as a Rothbardian libertarian, I never heard an honest appraisal of any leftist thinker, just strawmen. But then I didn't realize because I lived in a bubble. Having spent some time thinking about it, it seems pretty simple. Egalitarianism means treating each other as equally worthy of respect. Instead of being equally oppressed, we're equally invested in each other's freedom. Respect means valuing each other's lives and freedom. And in that vein, I think it would necessarily entail making the things we need to survive available to everyone. In other words, equality of access. Would such a society lead to faceless and identical creatures? Actually, it would mean the opposite. If we all had the means to survive without having to accept work from capitalists to get it, we would have more time and energy and health to develop ourselves as individuals and solve problems as collectives. It's not a question of favoring the collective or the individual over the other, because the collective and the individual are constantly interacting and creating each other. Murray says egalitarianism is a virtue on the left, but apparently hasn't read or thought about what that means. Because he says the diversity of human individuality is inequality. An egalitarian society can only hope to achieve its goals by totalitarian methods of coercion. It's weird to me that someone who's so opposed to the state has so much trouble seeing it as a tool for creating and deepening inequality. A truly egalitarian society is not one with an especially strong state, but one with no state, which, according to a book he wrote a year earlier, was Murray's goal too. The great fact of individual difference and variability, that is, inequality, is evident from the long record of human experience, hence the general recognition of the anti-human nature of a world of coerced uniformity. Murray presents a great example of the Motte and Bailey fallacy. That's where the speaker conflates 2 arguments. One easy to defend, in this case that individuals are all different, and one harder to defend, that social inequality can be traced to these differences, and assumes defending the easy argument means he's also defended the hard one. Like, yeah, we have different abilities, but that tells us nothing about material inequality. Again, if he thinks he's criticizing how leftists think, he's way off. Socially and economically, this variability manifests itself in the universal division of labor and in the iron law of oligarchy. The insight that in every organization or activity, a few, generally the most able and or the most interested, will end up as leaders, with the mass of the membership filling the ranks of the followers. In both cases, the same phenomenon is at work. Outstanding success or leadership in any given activity is attained by what Jefferson called a natural aristocracy, those who are best attuned to that activity. First, this argument begs the question. It assumes that because there are people on the top, they are the correct people to make the decisions. That would only be true in some kind of perfect meritocracy, where people are somehow assigned duties based purely on their abilities, and promoted to precisely where they should be. So I guess some people are really good at owning stuff and giving orders, and others are highly skilled at being poor. Wait, did I just learn economics? Who are these selfless, unbiased, community-minded decision makers who promote entirely based on merit? How do we know they're so much better than everyone else at outstanding success or leadership, whatever that means, that they should be the ones to make the decisions on their own? As I explained in this video, corporations and other institutions are designed so a few people on the top can exert maximum power over the highest number of people. The people who rise highest in those organizations are the ones who can keep the ones under them under control. Second, this argument is an extremely superficial reading of history. This is a theme in all right-libertarian literature. Don't include real history because it derails your theory. That's why their essays have so many hypotheticals. Imagine we were on a desert island. Well, we're not. If Murray took into account thousands of years of state-enforced inequality all over the world, his essay would fall apart. To understand inequality, you might have to look at things like slavery, colonialism, racism, war, patriarchy, and original expropriation as factors that have driven the accumulation of wealth and the hierarchical structure of society. If you really explain the result of all these processes as some people are just naturally more virtuous than others, your argument is beneath contempt. Look at all these quotation marks around oppressed. He doesn't seem to think anyone is oppressed by anything, which is weird because what are the laws and police and prisons for? While we're at it, what is libertarianism for? Again, the literature on oppression existed, but he doesn't acknowledge it. Like, how could women possibly be oppressed? Men are supposed to dominate them. Or the women's liberationists can hardly deny the fact that every culture and civilization in history, from the simplest to the most complex, has been dominated by males. Have they, though? I think an anthropologist might beg to differ. At least the simplest societies were dominated by males. But to the extent that it's true, why do you think that is? It's biology itself. It's the easiest thing in the world to use science to explain and justify the status quo. To call something science and say everyone who disagrees with you is anti-science. It's science. It's common sense. It's just a fact. And like most people using science to justify their assumptions, Murray doesn't know the science. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. I know we didn't have Silvia Federici and Maria Mies and Gerda Lerner in Murray's time, but painting women's domination by men as natural, the way it's obviously supposed to be, is yet another unexamined assumption of this essay. What do you think? Women are just naturally good at housework and men are naturally good at all other work? And to modify that relationship would be a violation of our nature? We don't know if there's any biological reason for women's subordination to men. We can identify many historical reasons. Women have been subjugated through violence repeatedly, systematically, all around the world, as any feminist scholar could have told Murray if he had wanted to ask. At the end, Murray does finally get round to quoting a bunch of socialists who he claims were egalitarians when some of them weren't, but instead of addressing the arguments, he does what other right-wingers do. He just assumes his cherry-picked quotes represent the body of doctrine, and that those quotes are so obviously wrong, he doesn't need to argue against them. If Murray were alive today, I might suggest this short essay by Zoe Baker. She explains what it means to have equality of condition. The means of production are owned in common, and no person has the institutionalized power to impose their will on others via force. This not only creates a situation in which people are no longer subject to domination and exploitation by the ruling classes. It, in addition to this, establishes the real possibility for all people to do and be a wide variety of different things, since their ability to act is no longer limited by poverty, borders, government bureaucracy, having to work for a capitalist to survive, etc. This equality of conditions is the social basis from which people can engage in an open-ended process of striving towards the goal of universal human cooperation at a societal level, and the formation of bonds of mutual support and love at the level of our day-to-day lives with friends, families, partners, and so on. Then she gives examples from anthropology, because far from being a revolt against nature, treating people as equals, sharing resources, making decisions together are fundamental to who we are. Murray's influence is less visible than that of Ayn Rand. We'll get to Ayn herself later, but on the way, let's check in on her legacy at the Ayn Rand Institute. Ayn Rand Institute. Wonder what that place is like.
A bottle? Mrs. Simpson, do you know what a baby's saying when she reaches for a bottle? She's saying, I am a leech. Our aim here is to develop the bottle within.
It's probably a bit different. What's their stance on inequality? It seems they don't care. This article cuts a clear distinction between political equality and economic equality. The only kind of equality that is possible is also the only kind that matters, political equality, which refers to equality of rights. I disagree with the assumption that there can be a separation between the two, when in practice, political and economic inequality always go hand in hand. The authors claim the founding of the United States was the dawn of an age where the state guarded political rights. Each individual, the founding fathers held, is to be regarded by the government as having the same rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as any other individual. Well, that's certainly what the founders wrote. The Randians mention slavery in parentheses, because if they acknowledged the effects of slavery, or native genocides, or patriarchy, or indentured servitude, or the suppression of unions, or how anyone other than propertied white men had no rights, then they'd have to re-examine their theory. But what's the value of rights if they're only on paper? The answer is the propaganda value of people believing in that paper, which is immeasurable. To explain today's vast inequalities of wealth and power, the authors sum up American history this way. Protecting people's equal rights invariably leads to differences in economic condition, as some people use their freedom to create modest amounts of wealth, while others reach the highest levels of financial success, through merit rather than through government-granted privilege. There are a number of problems with this argument. First, different people have different amounts of freedom, whatever the paper says. In the early days of the United States, even more than today, people, many of them children, worked all day. Where do you find the freedom to create any wealth when you're working 12 to 16-hour days and getting poisoned by your workplace? There's no freedom on a factory floor. It's an insult to the people who worked and died to enrich the capitalist class to suggest they ever had the freedom or opportunity to get rich, or to imply you could get rich by merit when it's poor people desperate for your money who do all the work. Second, I'm not really sure which part of history these guys are talking about. That time when there was no government-granted privilege? When wealth was created through voluntary means? When poor people's rights were protected? when there weren't large groups of people subjugated, persecuted, or confined to the home? The authors seem to assume the rich have not always controlled the system and used it to enslave the poor. Just because rights exist on paper doesn't mean they've ever been upheld in practice. The authors see the founding of the US as the birth of political equality, when really it was just a new state, one that justifies its existence with rights. In a land of opportunity, an individual should succeed or fail on the basis of merit, not political privilege. You deserve what you earn. No more, no less. Why? Because your boss is the arbiter of everything you deserve? Because the market decided through market alchemy? But I already know the philosophy behind it. I've made a video about this too. Some people think things like ownership and money are justice. So if you have this much money or property, that's how much you deserve, unless you stole it illegally. This brand of elitist philosophy assumes, by stepping lightly over the is-ought problem, that money is distributed according to merit. If you have far more money than someone else, even if you inherited it all and never worked a day in your life, it's yours by right. And if anyone tries to take any of it, even if they need it to survive, they're stealing and deserve to be punished, because they're assuming anyone can make any amount of money and don't face any barriers. People who talk about how great capitalism is don't like to acknowledge how wealth is created. First, by taking everything away from the workers, so they're forced to accept work from the people who took everything away. Then, by taking more from workers than you give back. Taking from nature without giving anything back. Owning things and charging rent for them. That's how people get wealthy. That's why only a small minority of the population could ever be wealthy, because they need an underclass to build that wealth for them. To tell the full story, these right libertarians might have to listen to people who know the relevant history, sociology, political economy, feminism, all the people they've been told are wrong about everything. Instead, imagine there's a level playing field. But when the referee works for one team and keeps calling in their favor and penalizing their opponents because their power and wealth depend on it, then I don't want to play your game. This article, in fact, reveals that merit and political rights are largely a farce, propaganda tools to claim people are at least equal in the way that matters, when clearly we are unequal for identifiable reasons and with identifiably violent effects. The authors make the same assumptions most conservatives make. We had simple political equality, then some people came along and created a bunch of wealth for themselves by being enterprising and innovative and shifting paradigms. But when? Under any political system, wealth is only accessible to a few people. There's no economic equality because there's no political equality. There's no chance for equality when states and the ruling classes they serve exist. States establish the rule of a few people over everyone else. States monopolize powers like who gets to own resources and extract rent from people, and when to use violence to protect those relationships. As a result, some people own everything and most people own nothing. So they have to work for the owners. I explain why in this series, but those videos are about history, so the Ayn Rand Institute won't be interested. Ayn Rand called her philosophy objectivism. If you've read Atlas Shrugged, you might have an idea of what objectivism is and how Ayn thought, but if not, she spelled it out in an essay. She doesn't actually mention egalitarianism, but sketches out the philosophy and ethics that influence the people that, I just read. This essay teaches us that opposing egalitarianism is just rational and moral. Let's take a look. The book is called The Virtue of Selfishness. In the introduction, Ein asserts, in popular usage, the word selfishness is a synonym of evil. The image it conjures is of a murderous brute who tramples over piles of corpses to achieve his own ends, who cares for no living being and pursues nothing but the gratification of the mindless whims of any immediate moment. I thought it was more like when you take more than your share and don't let others have a turn. I kind of think there are stronger words than selfish for murderous brutes. Apparently, the exact meaning and dictionary definition of the word selfishness is concern with one's own interests. That's funny because dictionary.com says it means concern only with one's own interests. Let's see. Merriam-Webster says concern for one's welfare at the expense of or in disregard of others, which is why we ascribe an antisocial element to it. Maybe the meaning has changed since 1964. She says altruism means any concern with one's own interests is evil, regardless of what these interests might be. Like, yeah, people will try to manipulate you by calling you selfish, but you don't need this book to know that. I don't know many people who say you shouldn't do what's right for yourself. If you're really hungry and you're getting food, do other people say, hey, put that down until you've fed someone else? Then the only way we could eat would be to get someone else to feed us. Observe the indecency of what passes for moral judgments today. An industrialist who produces a fortune and a gangster who robs a bank are regarded as equally immoral since they both sought wealth for their own selfish benefit. To me, the industrialist who paid his workers as low as he could under whatever working conditions and back in Ein's time possibly employing strikebreakers to beat them up, causes far more harm than someone stealing money from a bank. But I understand both of them. Capitalism incentivizes the actions of both the capitalist and the illegal robber. Both kinds of people are inevitable in such a system. The being selfish part is irrelevant because we're all capable of being selfish, but when we want to be altruistic, we can be altruistic too. It doesn't rip your soul in half. Oh, wait. Turns out it does. Since nature does not provide man with an automatic form of survival, since he has to support his life by his own effort, the doctrine that concern with one's own interests is evil means that man's desire to live is evil. That man's life as such is evil. No doctrine could be more evil than that. All I said was it's your turn to take out the garbage. Yet that is the meaning of altruism, implicit in such examples as the equation of an industrialist with a robber. There is a fundamental moral difference between a man who sees his self-interest in production and a man who sees it in robbery. Actually, historically, there isn't. As I explained in my series on the subject, owning stuff and robbery are kind of the same thing, just a difference of legality, which is determined by the people who own everything. The evil of a robber does not lie in the fact that he pursues his own interest, but in what he regards as to his own interest. Not in the fact that he pursues his values, but in what he chose to value. Not the fact that he wants to live, but in the fact that he wants to live on a subhuman level. With that word subhuman, we begin to see that Ein considers her morality objective. You're not really human because you're in conflict with universal objective human morality. I wonder if she ever read any other philosophy. Obviously, if you're subhuman, you are evil, not capable of the correct morality or rationality, and therefore deserve your poverty and oppression. The purpose of morality is to define man's proper values and interests. So we have to find out the one true morality that has to be the same for everyone? Well, that should be quite the philosophical journey. That concern with his own interests is the essence of a moral existence. Oh, never mind, she's already solved it. And that man must be the beneficiary of his own moral actions. So to be moral, I can't do things to benefit others at my own expense? That would be evil? Does it benefit me to help an old person cross the street? Does it benefit me to stand up and give them my seat on a bus? Does it benefit me to give my money to people on the street? How many morality points do you lose when you risk prison to stop a genocide? Hell, if selfishness is moral and altruism is immoral, I might not bother to stop when I'm driving and people get in my way. It doesn't benefit me to stop unless I think a given person or family might damage the front of my car. Living objectivist morality might be a bit of a challenge. Man's right to pursue his own interest is derived from his nature as man and from the function of moral values in human life. I could agree with that for the purpose of discussion, and therefore is applicable only in the context of a rational, objectively demonstrated and validated code of moral principles which define and determine his actual self-interest. I don't know about that part. We've always pursued self-interest in one way or another. We've never had a rational code of moral principles that defined and determined our self-interest. How could we? We'll come back to that question in a minute. It's almost like Ein wanted to start a cult. I have figured out the perfect morality for all humans. So join me, and you will finally be able to pursue your self-interest. My thinking is objective, so you shall call yourselves objectivists. But at least Ein believes in my right to do as I please, right? It is not a license to do as he pleases. And is not applicable to the altruist's image of a selfish brute. Wasn't that your image? Nor to any man motivated by irrational emotions, feelings, urges, wishes, or whims. But what if my interest is irrational by your definition? Am I still evil? It's getting hard to know who's allowed to pursue what interests. Let's keep going. No philosopher has given a rational, objectively demonstrable, scientific answer to the question of why man needs a code of values. So long as that question remained unanswered, no rational, scientific, objective code of ethics could be discovered or defined. How could you arrive at such a code? The fact that you couldn't get everyone to agree on one leads me to think there is no such thing. All this talk about rationality emanates from the assumption that we're capable of understanding the world objectively and deriving principles from it. On the one hand, yeah, there must be such principles, or else science would be a waste of time. And yes, our principles of thought should be based in reality. On the other hand, how could you possibly discover universal moral principles scientifically? For one thing, psychology is way less of a hard science than the hard sciences. For another, there's so much misinformation out there, much of it very firmly believed, and it's one of those things that stands in the way of an objective view of the world. It's much easier to just grab someone else's words and opinions, call them your own, and claim you reached them by objective, rational study. So that's what most people do. The standard of value of the objectivist ethics, the standard by which one judges what is good or evil, is man's life, or that which is required for man's survival qua man. So can I infer from this standard both killing a person and depriving them of the means of life would be considered evil? Because if so, I would have thought that would make you oppose property rights, since it's property that deprives most people of what they need to survive. If land and other resources weren't privately owned, they would be accessible to everyone. If some men attempt to survive by means of brute force or fraud, by looting, robbing, cheating, or enslaving the men who produce, it still remains true that their survival is made possible only by their victims, only by the men who choose to think and to produce the goods which they, the looters, are seizing. Such looters are parasites, incapable of survival, who exist by destroying those who are capable, those who are pursuing a course of action proper to man. What I don't understand is how she could talk like this and then turn around and support capitalism, which for the past 400 years has looted, robbed, cheated, and enslaved people. Rational, moral people go around the world looting communities. Then when the locals are desperate for work, the rational, moral Ubermensches employ the people at low wages and long hours and poor working conditions and pollute their communities with the waste. You would have to imagine this class had risen and attained power through their own hard work, rather than violent expropriation. This is why I beg these libertarians to learn the history of what they talk about. The people they think contribute the most are actually the biggest thieves. The three cardinal values of the objectivist ethics, the three values which together are the means to and the realization of one's ultimate value, one's own life, are reason, purpose, self-esteem. With their three corresponding virtues, rationality, productiveness, pride. So our purpose is to be productive. That is the conclusion you will reach if you are rational. Rationality is man's basic virtue, the source of all his other virtues. So if I don't or can't reason, I can't be virtuous? What if I act virtuously but haven't finished Atlas Shrugged yet, and so don't have a rational code of ethics? Am I still virtuous? Productive work is the central purpose of a rational man's life, the central value that integrates and determines the hierarchy of all his other values. Do you believe that? Productive work is the purpose of your life? What if you're unemployed? What if you work but your work isn't very useful? Are you worthless? Or are you just stuck in capitalism? What if you're disabled and can't do a lot of supposedly productive work? Are you just a parasite? This is what happens when you try to apply moral principles to everyone. You trample on all the exceptions you made. Reason is the source, the precondition of his productive work. Pride is the result. But who really reasoned their way into the work they do? Most of us take what's available, guess at what major we might like, guess at what jobs we might hate the least. If you're going to start your own company, you got to guess at what'll make money. And you can only do any of these things if the opportunity is there for you, and it's not there for everyone. So what makes work productive? Productive work doesn't mean the unfocused performance of the motions of some job. It means the consciously chosen pursuit of a productive career in any line of rational endeavor, great or modest, on any level of ability. Most of us have little to no opportunity to be this kind of productive at any time in our lives. I keep feeling it would be easy to achieve Randian virtues if you had no work or school, so you could devote yourself to whatever activities with whichever goals you might like. Under capitalism, most people don't have time for meaningful occupations because they're too busy at their jobs or studying so they can get jobs. The objectivist ethics holds that human good does not require human sacrifices, and cannot be achieved by the sacrifice of anyone to anyone. It holds that the rational interests of men do not clash, that there is no conflict of interest among men who do not desire the unearned, who do not make sacrifices nor accept them, who deal with one another as traders, giving value for value. Great. But again, that doesn't describe capitalism. I keep hearing this argument from these libertarians. I'm in favor of free trade, and capitalism is just free trade. No, it isn't. I don't know if such a situation has ever existed, but maybe that's what Galt's Gulch was about. Love, friendship, respect, admiration are the emotional response of one man to the virtues of another, the spiritual payment given in exchange for the personal, selfish pleasure which one man derives from the virtues of another man's character. I'm getting that feeling I get when someone smudges definitions to fit everything into their theory. Think about your closest, most rewarding relationships. Does trade accurately describe them? Or are friendship and community and trust something more than that? You can also practice kindness, humility, generosity, and mutual aid. Are those things irrational? But maybe all she's saying is we choose to associate with people we like, and that's the same as trade. But is it? I'm forced to trade because I'm forced to earn money. The only thing I can offer is my body, and the people willing to pay to rent it are capitalists. I'm forced to rent a home and pay whatever price the landlord charges. I'm forced to buy groceries from 1 or 2 or 3 grocery stores. I might be forced to get a car so I can work. It's not my friends and family who are forcing me. It's the capitalist system. It is only on the basis of rational selfishness, on the basis of justice, that men can be fit to live together in a free, peaceful, prosperous, benevolent, rational society. We can only be free and live together if everyone agrees with me. The basic political principle of the objectivist ethics is, no man may initiate the use of physical force against others. No man or group or society or government has the right to assume the role of a criminal and initiate the use of physical compulsion against any man. This reasoning has led in more recent times to what's called the non-aggression principle, or NAP. My problem with it is it can't be applied to the real world as it is, but only to a new, theoretical society started from scratch. Because the world we live in is one where many people have already initiated force against many, many others, have been for thousands of years, and wealth is divided on that basis. Force is initiated every time someone defends their claim to own things other people need, like land, food, homes, and so on, just because they own them. As if ownership was the trump card in ethics, and there's no need to ask how they came to own so much. Without property rights, no other rights are possible. Let's see, the state protects property, but most people don't own property and don't have any other kind of rights, so I guess she hit that nail on the head. When I say capitalism, I mean a full, pure, uncontrolled, unregulated, laissez-faire capitalism. People influenced by Einstein's philosophy often say the same. The system isn't capitalism, it's crony capitalism or something fundamentally different. Capitalism is this awesome system that means freedom that has never existed. But then they go on to use their justification of this imaginary capitalism to excuse and support the existing capitalist system. It's happened with every laissez-faire libertarian I've read or talked to. Actual capitalism that exists is based on a few people taking, owning, and defending with force everything they can get their hands on. Everything is taken from us, and we're forced to work to get it back. But instead of acknowledging capitalism the way it is, with zero regard to how the state facilitates the transfer of wealth to the rich, these libertarians excuse anyone's wealth because they made it through legitimate means, because capitalism is just free trade, so nothing was ever stolen, and that's the end of the story. The market is like God to some people. If the market wills it, it's rational, which is virtuous. If someone is wealthy, they, or their slave owner ancestors, must have earned it. And if someone's poor, they have no one to blame but themselves. If that's what you think, subscribe, because you need this channel. So what have we learned? If you want to be virtuous, by Einstein's definition, you must be productive, by Einstein's definition, rational, by Einstein's definition, and selfish, by Einstein's definition. And if everybody acts the right way, we'll have capitalism, by Einstein's definition. None of the arguments I've seen today have convinced me we shouldn't be treated equally. Not just on paper, not just given equally low wages, but everyone given equal access to and power in making decisions for all the resources they depend on. That would be the closest thing to equal political rights we could achieve. What's to be scared of? Why would that be a revolt against rationality, morality, even nature itself? It would be a revolt against a system and ideology that force us to get money by whatever means necessary, to do work we hate, to compete with each other over scraps while our employers make all the money and decisions. We don't need some special value system arrived at by the most rational people to determine who deserves how much of what. If we eliminate oppressive systems and the thinking that keeps them in place, we'll be equally free to access what we need, associate with one another as we like, and develop ourselves how we want. If you see value in this vision of egalitarianism, you're in good company. It's possible. We're building it. You can too. You can apply it in your relations with other people. You might do that already. Do you treat everyone with respect, regardless of superficial factors like race, gender, and appearance? But you can also join or start egalitarian organizations. The specifics will vary according to your context, what needs doing, how, by who, and how urgently. Instead of levels of management, everyone gets a say in all relevant decisions. It might take a little longer, but that's because you have a voice now. When you work, it's because you've chosen to do it, not because you have to. All of society could be organized on that basis. Decisions would need to be made in small groups, not in groups of millions like today, because then we'd never reach consensus. But that's fine. Most things don't need millions of people to agree, just those who are affected by the decisions. It's not a revolt against nature. Treating each other as equals is as old as the human race. And it's how to secure our freedom.